While millions of people were watching, Jim Jordan tried to change the law. But Jasmine Crockett didn't get angry or interrupt. She waited patiently, then gently told him the truth, page by page, right there on live TV. You could tell that the room was quiet. A peculiar calmness came over everything. Jasmine leaned forward a little and spoke in a calm, steady voice. Her eyes were on Jim Jordan. She said clearly, "That's not what the court ruling says." She didn't yell. She didn't fight back. She was honest and spoke clearly. Jordan tried to converse again, going through his papers, but Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She just read the Supreme Court's judgment out loud. She looked up every now and then to make sure everyone knew how important this was. She remarked, "It's okay to have different opinions, but it's not okay to lie about the law when millions of people are watching, especially when the stakes are so high." It was a Tuesday afternoon in Washington, but people all throughout the country stopped what they were doing. Some people were having lunch. Some people were looking at their phones. At that moment, everyone was paying attention. Messages were coming in on phones. There were a lot of comments on live streaming. Lawyers on Twitter couldn't believe what they saw. One lawyer observed, "She just did in 2 minutes what 3 years of hearings couldn't." This wasn't planned or practiced. It was true. You could see Jasmine holding her binder like a weapon, preparing to use it. She knew what she was saying and why it was important. Jim Jordan had been attempting to emphasize that the federal government was going too far, that the courts had already made decisions, and that any additional conversation was merely political theater. But Jasmine was there to remind everyone that facts are still important. The committee room, which is typically loud, became quiet. The personnel even stopped what they were doing. This wasn't a play. There was no beating about the bush. This was the fact. That might be why no one could look away. There was no drama or yelling, simply someone performing her job better than everyone thought she could. She said, "I'm not here to get points. I'm here to protect the law. And the law is clear. Oversight is not a choice. It's necessary when lives are in danger and the Constitution isn't followed." She didn't trip or become mad. This wasn't about being famous or going viral. It was about something that a lot of people forget, doing the job well. News outlets cut the occasion short. Some people labeled it a takedown, while others thought it was merely a fix. But in reality, it was quieter than that. Jasmine wasn't mad. People will remember this moment because she was so exact. The clip was everywhere by the end of the day. People on both sides talked about it. Some people agreed with her. Some people felt Jordan seemed ashamed. But no one could argue with the data she gave. Jordan just sat there calmly, pinning down things that no one would remember. But Jasmine had already made sure that everyone would remember her. But how did this moment even come to be? We need to go back a bit to understand. Most people weren't paying attention 2 weeks before this hearing. The Judiciary Committee has a lot of dull things on its agenda. But then a new idea started to spread, a regulation that would stop the federal government from looking into local police. In short, it held that anyone who had their civil rights violated had to attempt every local alternative before the federal government could help. It sounded official and sophisticated, but it really made it tougher to get justice. This was a significant difficulty for anyone who knew how the system worked, especially lawyers who were trying to get justice. It was a method to put off doing something and preserve local governments that regularly let people down. Jasmine Crockett knew this very well. She was more than just a lawmaker. She had worked as a civil rights lawyer in Dallas. She sat with moms whose sons had been killed by cops. She went to court and filed complaints to get justice. She didn't simply look at this new proposal. She read it. She paid close attention to every word. She used red ink to circle the most critical portions. She calmly put together her case like a lady who understood she had to be ready. The committee was getting ready for a struggle behind the scenes. Jordan's team intended the approach to sound like plain sense, merely keep the government from becoming too involved. They hoped that people wouldn't pay attention to the specifics. But Jasmine didn't talk to reporters on TV or give them notes. She worked quietly with her team, going over court decisions again and calling legal experts to make sure her facts were correct. There was a lot of stress. Some members of her own party encouraged her to back off and choose easier fights, but she wasn't thinking about politics at all. She thought of a family in Kansas City who wouldn't even know this hearing was going on, but whose rights would be affected by what was decided. Jasmine worked late in her office the night before the hearing. She wasn't wearing heels. There were papers all over the place. She wasn't working on her speeches. She was getting information ready. She saw a picture on her desk from her graduation from law school. Her mother, who worked 2 jobs but still helped her study, was there. That woman taught her not to be afraid of hard things, and Jasmine didn't. Jasmine wasn't thinking about going viral the morning of the hearing. She was focused on the law, the truth, and the individual she had to protect. Jim Jordan, on the other hand, seemed calm. He smiled for the cameras and made jokes with his colleagues. He was ready to talk, with printed notes that were bolded and highlighted. He didn't fully comprehend the ruling he was going to utilize, though. The fissures revealed almost quickly as Jordan spoke. Jasmine listened to every word. After numerous hearings, you start to observe that power doesn't necessarily speak the loudest. Sometimes it just sits there and watches and listens. That's what Jasmine did. Jordan acted as if he had already won. He leaned back and smiled a little as he tapped his pen, as if he were pacing his answer. He didn't even look at Jasmine. This committee must protect local control, he stated. Federal government can't keep stepping on our communities. He talked loudly about overreach and cited a court opinion as proof he was right. But Jasmine had also read the same case. She didn't just pick sections that assisted her. She read every word carefully. That's what sets a politician apart from a lawyer who has really fought cases. A few people moved in their chairs. The staff kept a careful eye on things. They had seen fights before, and they were generally loud and messy. But this one was different. You could tell Jasmine was ready before she spoke. A member on her left spoke to his aide, but maintained an eye on Jasmine. Another person on her right smiled, sure that Jordan's disagreement wouldn't last long. I had heard Jordan's argument before. He tried to make it appear like the policy was meant to defend freedom from the government. It worked with the people who supported him online, but it didn't hold up in court. Jasmine was ready for a lawyer to look at her case. Jasmine had a similar experience years ago when she was a new lawyer. She once defended a case of housing discrimination in which the other party misquoted the rules. She waited patiently until the judge asked for proof, and then she quietly fixed the record with her binder. She never forgot that being patient is the best way to win when there are a lot of boisterous males around. Jasmine didn't say anything straight away once Jordan was done talking, even though she thought she would get applause. She opened her binder, turned 2 pages, moved her microphone, and then asked, "Are you talking about the Thompson versus Jackson County case from 2006? Jordan blinked and agreed. Jasmine tapped her pen on the page and continued, "That case actually backed up federal oversight in cases of serious misconduct, which is exactly what we're talking about." Nothing was said. Some people looked down. The whisper stopped. She went on, "You left out the section that states a federal probe is needed because local officials didn't do anything. That's not an excuse to cut back on supervision. It's a warning of what could happen if oversight is taken away." She didn't yell or disrespect anyone, but her comments hit hard. Jordan tried to answer, but he didn't sound sure. He said, "That's your take on it?" "No," Jasmine answered quietly. "I'm reading what the court said." After that, she began to quote the verdict line by line. The cameras didn't see everything, but the people watching realized this was a real fact check. One individual seemed to regret what he had said before. Another person smiled silently, understanding that this moment was special. Jasmine read, "The court said, and I quote, when local and state authorities fail to protect constitutional rights, federal oversight is not just appropriate, it is necessary." Jordan seemed to be in pain. "Isn't that the main point?" he asked. Jasmine said, "I'm reading exactly what the court said. This was the first important event of the hearing." In hearings, participants usually talk over each other. It's loud and messy, But no one here spoke. Everyone paid attention. Jasmine went on to say, the court also said that pattern investigations under the Civil Rights Act are not only allowed, but in some cases, they are required. She looked down, then back up, and met Jordan's gaze. I'm not arguing about opinions. I'm giving clear legal precedence that matters here. Jordan leaned forward and held his hands tightly. The people of the United States desire less government interference. Representative Crockett quickly responded. To what Jim Jordan said, he stated that's what this bill is about. The American people want protection from abuse. Jasmine said right away, especially when that abuse hides behind a badge or a robe. You could tell how much her remarks affected the room. This wasn't just politics, it was real life. Representative Donnelly massaged his eyes and took off his spectacles nearby. A staff member tried to give him another paper to alter the subject, but he waved it aside. He knew that Crockett had caught Jordan making a mistake. Crockett didn't smile or rejoice, though. She kept her expression serene and serious. This wasn't a win for her. It was a long overdue adjustment. She leaned back and let her words sink in. Then whispers began, but not in the room. They were somewhere else. People quickly uploaded footage of her calling out Jordan's erroneous comment on social media, in group conversations, and during live streams. Some headlines included things like "She just ended him" and "Law school one-on-one." But in the room, it wasn't a viral show. She made her argument like a genuine professional, with precision and little drama, so it was quiet and strong. She was right about every court decision she quoted. There was proof for every fact. And every time Jordan tried to answer, he showed that he hadn't read the whole opinions himself. I don't doubt your intentions, Chairman, she remarked in a kind way. But we have to be exact when we quote the law here. Otherwise, we're just playing politics with people's rights. She stopped there. She could have pushed harder, but she knew when to stop. Things don't take long when you have real power. Jordan said something under his breath, but he didn't protest anymore. He turned the page and stared at it as if he were looking for a way out. But there wasn't one, at least not anymore. It wasn't just what she said that made this moment so unforgettable. It was why she could say it with such confidence. Jasmine Crockett didn't come from a powerful family. She didn't have a microphone in front of her when she was a kid. She wasn't taught to talk over others or chase after viral moments. She was a kid from St. Louis who didn't have much, but her family trained her early on how to tell the truth and stand by it. Jasmine's mom used to tell her, "Don't raise your voice, raise your reason." This lasted with her through college and law school. At that point, she could already see the flaws in the system, places where people dropped through and no one noticed. Jasmine wasn't the most talkative person in class, but her notebooks were full with notes and important things. She stayed late in libraries to check facts, not to prove anything, but because being right was a matter of life and death. She didn't work in luxurious offices when she first started practicing law. Her work was authentic and raw. She worked for clients who couldn't pay. People who were let down or disregarded by the system that was supposed to safeguard them. She learned what real stakes were in small, stressful courtrooms with flickering lights. It wasn't about being the brightest person there. It was about being the best prepared. Jasmine didn't get upset when Jim Jordan mentioned a case he barely half understood. She acted like someone who spent evenings underlining margins while charging her phone on the floors of courthouses, like someone who once stood outside a jail to meet a fearful adolescent who was facing charges for something he didn't do. This was second nature to me. Her cool takedown during the hearing did more than convey a point. It revealed something bigger. People who treat the law like a game and people who recognize it's a lifeline are different. She recognized that holding police accountable wasn't just a notion. It was about real people. People were hauled over for no reason, falsely accused, abused, ignored, and silenced. That day, she had their names in her head when she fixed the record. She could easily quote page numbers because she didn't practice for TV. She used such decisions to keep her clients safe. She had only a worn-out legal pad with her when she went to court and the weight of someone else's hope. So when she got down with Jordan and talked about federal jurisdiction, it wasn't just theory, it was real. After the hearing, Ronald Burns, a warehouse worker in El Paso who used to be her client, sent her a message that said, "I saw you today. You are still fighting the same way you did for me. Thank you." That meant more to me than any news story. The hearing was for the whole country, yet she still thought locally. She spoke for people as well as policy. Her tone never altered while she answered inquiries from other members of the committee. Clear, measured, and concentrated. When someone tried to make things more complicated, she always brought them back to what was important. She stated, at one point, due process doesn't come with conditions. You can't stop it when it's not convenient. That kind of clarity affected viewers in a way that commentators never could. She wasn't attempting to get attention. She wanted people to know that the law isn't just a tool, it's a commitment. She didn't seem shaken, even when Jordan fell, because she knew that sounding sure and being right were not the same thing. There was something else going on while millions of people watched online. People who lived far away from Capitol Hill were responding. While working on a police misconduct case in Los Angeles, Tanisha Powell, a paralegal, had the live feed open. She wasn't really paying attention until Jasmine brought up the Thompson ruling. Tanisha stopped moving and said in a low voice, "Yo, she's really doing it." Marcus Lee, a second-year law student in Austin, watched the clip that was going viral while he was in the middle of a lecture. He clicked on expecting to see a raucous fight, but instead he saw calm control and unambiguous rule. He straightened up. It wasn't simply lawyers who felt it. Judith Barnes, a retired teacher from Springfield, Missouri, was folding laundry while the TV was on low. She heard Jasmine talking and turned up the volume while she sat on the edge of the couch. "She talks like she knows what she's talking about," she remarked. The video went viral quickly. In less than an hour, Twitter was full of responses. "This is what representation looks like," one person wrote. "No yelling, just the facts. Give her a degree in law." It wasn't about how well they did. People were used to politicians hollering and tossing sound bites at each other. But Jasmine had the intensity of a lawyer whose clients needed her too much to waste time on her ego. The story was taken up by cable news, but the tone was different. When they played back her corrections, lawyers on separate networks nodded. One experienced journalist commented, "We've become so used to chaos that when someone just knows what they're doing, it feels like a revolution." For people of color, especially young women, it was more than invigorating, it was personal. Destiny Ayers, who is 18 years old and lives in Milwaukee, had never seen a congressional hearing before. Her cousin emailed her the video with the note, "She reminds me of you." Destiny watched it twice without moving and scarcely breathing. For the first time in a long time, she saw someone who looked like her taking charge of the moment. It didn't stop there. Civics teachers showed the clip. Professors talked about it in criminal justice classes. Some conservative pundits even said that Crockett's understanding of the law was beyond question, even though they disagreed with her opinions. There was a topic on Reddit that said, "What law books is she reading? I want to read those too." But it wasn't about reading. It was all about getting ready. About being instructed for years to wait your turn and then coming up ready. That's why the clip worked. Not because of a funny insult or a phrase that went viral. Jasmine Crockett sat at the table, listened carefully, and when it was her turn, she utilized her time to clear up years of political confusion. She didn't insult or interrupt. She merely did her job better than she thought she would. Crockett wasn't reading the news while the internet was buzzing. She was thinking about something crucial that had happened in the past. Before the marble hallways and TV cameras, before the national news and trending hashtags, Jasmine Crockett sat in a modest old legal aid office in Dallas. It was 2013. The air conditioner didn't function very well. The chairs were not stable. There were coffee stains on the file she was holding. Denise Langford's son, Khalil, had been pulled over for a traffic stop the night before. He never came back home. The dashcam film, which Jasmine battled hard to get, told a totally different story than what the police said. But the district attorney in the area didn't do anything. No charges, no trial, and no justice. Denise sat there holding a picture of her son in his graduation robe. They acted like he was already guilty, she said quietly, as if he didn't matter. Jasmine didn't vow to do the right thing then. By then, she knew that vows were too easy to break in rooms like that. Instead, she gave commitment. This meant staying up late going through case law, submitting motions that most judges wouldn't even read past the first paragraph, and sitting in courtrooms full of stillness while the opposing side grinned, knowing the system was already stacked against them. It took 8 months of letters, filings, and appeals to get the federal government interested in the case. The local system had already decided that Khalil's life didn't count. Jasmine had never forgotten it. Not in 2013, not in 2019, and definitely not when she sat across from Jim Jordan in 2025, and he tried to take away the exact things that made federal accountability possible. That was the time that was going through her head when she said Thompson versus Jackson County. She could still picture herself sitting on the courthouse bench outside the appellate hearing, her sneakers scuffed from weeks of walking to meetings she wasn't invited to. There were no cameras rolling and no one tweeting quotes, yet the work was still important. It mattered that every identity that was erased, from police records, court transcripts, and news cycles, Denise Langford never got the answers she needed. There was no trial for the matter. The federal complaint was thrown out later, but it started an internal probe that led to 2 quiet firings and a change in how traffic stops are handled in the precinct. It wasn't justice, but it was something. And Jasmine took that thing with her into every room where people attempted to act like law was just politics dressed up in Latin. After the hearing, she sat alone in her office and took out an old folder. Denise Langford's case file was on the top page, and the corners were curled. She didn't keep it to show off or make a point. She kept it to remind herself why the truth is always more important than the moment. There were a lot of missed calls, unread texts, and media requests on her phone. They all wanted the same thing, her comment and soundbite, but she didn't answer them yet. Instead, she sat silently, thinking about how easy it was to get the law wrong when you didn't need it to stay alive. That was what made her different from Jordan. He saw the law as a way to argue and dominate people. But for her, it had been a lifeline for her clients, their families, and the names that no one else remembered. The next morning, when she finally talked to a reporter, she didn't talk about winning or becoming viral. She said, "I've seen what happens when the law gets twisted. It doesn't hit politicians first. It hurts people who can't afford to lose." Crockett wasn't the only one who thought that way, though. People all throughout the country who had never heard her name before were suddenly asking themselves a simple question. Is this the beginning of something new? The video clip didn't simply go viral in the days that followed. It also had people talking about it in locations that didn't usually watch C-SPAN. People in Detroit's barbershops saw it on TV, people in Tallahassee's classrooms heard it, and people in Phoenix's lunchrooms passed it around, with professors saying, "This is what civic engagement really looks like." This wasn't simply a moment for folks like Aaron Felder in Fresno, who is 26 years old, a law student, and a former community activist. It was a sign. Aaron had been having doubts about himself lately. He was unsure about the grind, the long nights spent reading, and whether all of it really meant. He had always thought that the law could protect people like his mother, who lost her job after being wrongfully arrested and almost ruined her life. But after years of seeing the system tilt toward power, he began to think that belief might have been foolish. After that, he saw Crockett. The video didn't seem like politics. It was a reminder that being ready could still mean something. That person, who looked like his elder cousin, could sit in that chair, talk softly, and still shock the whole room with nothing but facts. He viewed the clip again at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, then shut his laptop and opened his legal ethics book again. Miss Rivera, who runs an after-school program for predominantly Black and Latino kids at a modest community center in Camden, New Jersey, showed the clip to her students. Afterwards, she didn't say anything. She just watched how they reacted. "Amara, One of the females who had been silent all semester suddenly exclaimed she didn't even yell. She just knew what was important. People often tell girls like Amara that they need to be louder to be heard and to battle for space. But Jasmine Crockett taught them something else, that being clear may be louder than being loud. A man called Jerome was making breakfast in Columbus, Ohio, when the local station ran a story about the hearing. Zora, his 8-year-old daughter, pointed at the TV and asked, "Daddy, is she a judge?" He said, "No, baby. She tells the judges what to do." Zora blinked. "I want to do that." That, more than any tweet or think piece, is why the moment hit so hard. There were genuine people, ordinary people, who saw themselves in a way they hadn't before, even as lawmakers and pundits were arguing back and forth. Not as an afterthought or a symbol, but as a presence and a force. Someone who worked hard to get her voice heard without asking for permission. There was a change even among her critics. A host of a conservative talk radio show in Kansas City shocked his listeners when he said, "Look, I don't agree with her politics, but she made her case and backed it up." These days, that's not very common. You need to honor that. People respected her not because she asked for it, but because she came into an area that people thought she would tiptoe through and changed it. And even though the news cycle went on, Crockett's performance stayed in people's minds, not just as a headline, but as a point of reference, a standard. People who had felt like they weren't part of civic conversations were now invoking her name in school projects, dinner disputes, and even private daydreams. What's funny? She hadn't done anything to herself to make that happen. No fresh tone, no message that was softened, and no planned performance. She was just Jasmine, the same woman who had borrowed binders to go to court and outworked every lawyer on the other side. Now, millions of people could see what that looked like. But inside Congress, that moment had a big effect, especially on the people who had been quiet during the hearing, but were now scrambling to respond to the rising pressure. Jim Jordan got to work earlier than usual the morning following the hearing. His shoulders were tense and his face was hard to read. He nodded to his head of staff and then shut the door behind him. No press availability in the morning. No tweets. No answers. Just quiet. Jordan had always been good at politics, but even he couldn't spin what transpired in that room. The headlines were clear. Crockett sets the record straight, Jordan learns about federal law, and Congresswoman gives a real-time legal clinic. Cable news networks played the video over and over again, and commentators said that the moment had less to do with gotcha politics and more to do with a basic lack of understanding of the law. Some people even wondered if Jordan, as head of the Judiciary, could keep talking about changing the way police work if he couldn't properly cite past cases. Things grew more worse behind closed doors. Staff members looked over transcripts in committee rooms and side offices to assess how bad things had gotten. Some members of the committee, including a few who were on Jordan's side, started to distance themselves from the bill he had advocated. One person even quietly asked a staff member if Crockett may look over her notes. Jasmine, on the other hand, didn't say much in public. She had one interview on public radio when she said again that her intention wasn't to make anyone look bad. "I just want it to be right," she added. "We're not the ones who suffer when we get the law wrong. People outside this building do." But the pressure from the public was growing. Many activist groups had been screaming for changes for years, but now they had a soundbite that made their concerns more important. Civil rights groups shared the clip and included links to petitions. One organization in Tulsa sponsored ads in the area that included Crockett's, quote, "When the Constitution is being ignored, oversight isn't optional." There was a change happening. The phones in the committee started ringing more often. Staff members' inboxes were full of emails from residents who were not just angry about the bill, but also asking questions, quoting court decisions, and demanding responsibility. "I've never seen so many people use Supreme Court precedent in an email," remarked one legislative assistant afterward. Crockett didn't simply speak up. She taught a whole part of the country in 5 minutes. The press conference came next. Jordan tried to take back control with a carefully worded statement. He said, We believe in strong debate and different ways of looking at legal precedent. That's how democracy works. It fell flat. Reporters pushed him for details, asking which aspects of the Thompson verdict backed up his allegation. Did he admit that the parts Crockett pointed out were correct? He avoided answering the same questions over and again and didn't provide anything new. The political tide had turned by that afternoon. Several important politicians said they would not back the policy as it is. A few moderate Democrats who had been undecided before said that Crockett's explanation helped them make up their minds. And behind the scenes, there was already a new draft of the bill in the works. It had stronger rules for review and changed phrasing to make sure it wasn't misinterpreted. The win wasn't complete yet, but the conversation had altered. Jasmine Crockett went back to work as if nothing had occurred. She got to the budget subcommittee early, took calls from her constituents, and turned down every cable channel invitation that requested her to do the moment again for their segments. She realized the strength wasn't in the viral video itself, but in how it made a complicated and dangerous topic clearer. Later that week, her workers bought food from a restaurant and met at her office, tired but proud. Someone said, "We should put that binder in a frame." Crockett chuckled, shook her head, and added, "We're not done. We finally got to say what we wanted." She didn't speak loudly. She didn't say anything harsh. She just wouldn't let herself be put down. That made all the difference. But the truth is, this wasn't just about one hearing or one bill. It was about what happens when someone brings not only passion, but also preparation to a place that has lost track of the distinction. A few weeks later, the clip was no longer on the first page. The news had moved on. New bills, new problems, new things to worry about. But something about that time stayed with me. In a time when politics seems to be getting louder, meaner, and faster, what Jasmine Crockett did was almost radical in how simple it was. She came. She was honest. She didn't mess up, get angry, or try to get attention. She merely knew the law better than the guy who was trying to change it. And by doing this, she reminded everyone who was watching what real leadership is. That moment reminded everyone that skills are still important. Facts still matter. Even in a room where the loudest voice wins, real, planned preparation can still make a difference. People are sick of show-offs. People are sick of seeing public politicians talk confidently about something they haven't even read. They are sick of policies that affect the people those officials say they are protecting and then leaving without any consequences. Jasmine Crockett showed them a glimpse of something better. Not flawless, not polished, but real, honest, and earned. That's why it hurt so much. Because she made things clear in a time when there was a lot of spin. And that influence didn't just go away after a few news cycles. It stayed. People discussed about the law at dinner tables and in schools, where young pupils asked teachers, "Can we learn about what she said?" At community meetings, local leaders utilized her statements as the basis for policy requests, and they echoed her words. The tone even altered in Congress. People began to pay greater attention to the fine print. Members of the committee asked harder questions. And even though no one said it out loud, a lot of people started to prepare more for public hearings because they didn't want to be caught off guard, off balance, and exposed like Jordan was. Jasmine didn't have a family history. There wasn't a political machine behind her. She had experience. Time spent in courtrooms that don't have enough money and have lights that flicker and printers that are out of date. She spent time studying case law at 1 a.m. because her client's freedom rested on finding a technicality. Time spent learning the system so thoroughly that she could go to any hearing and stake her ground, not with ego, but with proof. That example of quietly and firmly standing up to incompetence isn't simply political. It's about you. We all know what it's like to be in a room when someone tried to push us around. Someone who was stronger, louder, and more sure of themselves, but less informed, sought to take charge of the conversation. We've all seen someone change the facts, lie about the regulations, or stretch the truth to fit their needs. And we've all thought about what it would be like to have the guts and the proof to fight back right away. Jasmine offered individuals a plan for how to stand firm. You don't have to be the most vocal. You don't have to be the most popular. But if you put in the effort, you can stand in any environment and not flinch. She didn't go to that hearing to hurt anyone, but she did prove that there is a big difference between pretending to know the law and truly knowing it. That's the lesson in a world where everyone is performing. Don't do it. Get ready. Be smart. Stick to what you've earned. When the time comes, and it will, you won't have to yell to be heard. You only need to speak clearly, and the room will be quiet. So if you're in law, education, healthcare, or anywhere else where someone feels they can talk over you, remember this: you don't need to be louder. You only have to be ready. Share this tale if it made you feel anything. Speak up. Use it. And most importantly, keep this in mind the next time you need to speak the truth in front of others. If you think that preparation is still important and that truth still has a place in public life, sign up for more. There are more tales like this one, and they should be told.